Rome is my favourite city, and I have travelled here many times to sample its history, its rituals, and its glory. But now I have come to uncover its little-known Jewish heritage. Situated on the banks of the Tiber between the Theatre of Marcello, the Isola Tiberina, and the trendy district of Trastevere, lies the Jewish ghetto and great temple of Rome. So over there is the Jewish temple, which is the centre of the Jewish ghetto. Legend states that when the Romans besieged Jerusalem in 70 AD, during the First Jewish-Roman War, a group of Jews, led by the Astrologo family, smuggled the great menorah out of the temple to keep it from falling into pagan hands. These Jews then made their way to Rome to join the Jewish community that had prospered here since the time of Herod the Great. The Roman Jews were no ordinary Jews. Distinct from their Ashkenazi and Sephardic cousins with their own customs, culture and language, their presence here predated the arrival of the first Christians by over a century, and it was among the Jewish community that the first Pope, St. Peter, a Jew, came to stay. Over the centuries their fortunes waxed and waned. The Jews were nominally under the protection of the Pope, but in July 1555, Pope Paul IV issued a decree that the Roman Jews must only live in the ghetto, around which a wall was built and whose gates were locked at night. Technically, the Jews were not allowed to own any property, even in the ghetto, or Seraglio degli Ebrei, the enclosure of the Jews in Italian. However, due to a quirk in the law, their Christian landlords could neither evict their Jewish tenants nor raise their rents. Let's go up to the Via Paganaccia. So, this is the ghetto. And if we look up there, this looks to me like a typical street. Again, thousands of people crammed into a very small space. Despite their deprivations, the ghetto grew, and with so many people living in such a small area, epidemics were inevitable. But a change for the better came with Napoleon, who believed that everyone under his rule should enjoy equal rights and protections, abolishing anti-Jewish laws, and by 1848, Pope Pius IX gave the Jews the freedom to live where they pleased. With their traditions of hard work and creative genius, the Jews of Rome flourished, with many becoming wealthy and influential. Stephen Fry just gets everywhere, doesn't he? Fascism, the bastard child of Italian socialism and the artistic movement Futurism, was first pioneered by Benito Mussolini, a blacksmith's son from the Romagna. Many artists, poets and Jews flocked to hear Mussolini, who promised a new dawn for Italian culture. Not only was the burgeoning movement not anti-Semitic at its start, but many prominent Jews helped to give Mussolini a veneer of respectability, fascinated by the new politics. Amongst these cultured and educated Jews was Margherita Sarfati, a prominent art critic and campaigner who became his mistress. And like Caesar Augustus, he promised to transform Rome. Soon, an unknown German agitator called Adolf Hitler began to send him fan mail, and within a few years, to the consternation of many Italians, Mussolini had fallen under the Führer's spell. And in 1938, the Italian fascists passed the notorious Manifesto of Race, preventing Jews from earning their livelihoods. The fascists lived it up, whilst Romans lived in fear of the secret police. For many, Mussolini's new mistress, Clara Petacci, summed up all that was corrupt and greedy. At the end of the war, as she fled for her life, it was rumoured she had jewellery stolen from the Jews of Rome sewn into the hem of her knickers. The tide turned again in 1943. The Italians, weary of Mussolini's failure and increasing infatuation with Hitler, rebelled. The king dismissed Mussolini, and he was placed under arrest whilst the government signed peace treaties with the Allies. Hitler, furious at Italy's betrayal, sent in the SS, who occupied Rome. As the king and his prime minister fled for Brindisi, only the Pope remained. Within days, they presented themselves at the Jewish archives, demanding details of inhabitants of the ghetto and artifacts held there. A few days later, trucks arrived and the entire archive was confiscated, never to be seen again, and the synagogue sealed as the Jews began to fear the world. And on October the 16th, 1943, the Nazis rounded them up in the square, shipped them all off to Auschwitz, where only one woman came back alive. I think there was something like 12 people survived of an entire unique people which was wiped out. As Karl Marx said, if you want to destroy a people, you must destroy their history and their heroes. Well, the Nazis learnt from Marx as much as they did from anybody else. Herbert Kappler, head of the Gestapo, was given the task of ridding Rome of Jews. A few days before the roundup, he had promised the ghetto immunity from action by the SS if they were to provide 50 kilos of gold. The people of Rome were horrified, and in a show of unity, Jews and non-Jews alike donated whatever gold they could spare, but it was to no avail. So we're here in, technically it's the Piazza Mattei, but actually the locals call it the Piazza del Tartughe, which is to do with the tortoises on top of the fountain. But it's from here that the Jews were rounded up and told to get all their belongings and to present themselves in 20 minutes with basically nothing but a suitcase and some jewellery and some money. And it was from here that they were taken up and rounded onto trucks and taken to the Via Tasso, to the German military quarters, where they were kept for 2 days in terrible conditions before they were transported to Auschwitz. When the Vatican found the Jews had been taken from under their very noses, there was shock and disbelief. The unworldly and mystical Pope, Eugenio Pacelli, Pius XII, had believed assurances by the German ambassador that the Jews of Rome would be safe, and had even offered his own personal gold to help pay Kappler's ransom. The question was, what to do? The answer came from Pacelli's housekeeper and companion, Mother Pascalina Lehnert, a Bavarian farmer's daughter who had risen to be the most powerful woman in the church. Thanks to the treaties Pacelli had signed, Vatican property was off limits to Nazis and fascists alike. So why not hide the Jews in the churches, convents and monasteries of Rome, and even the Vatican itself? Pius agreed, but she took one step further, printing thousands of Vatican passports to be distributed to Jews throughout Europe so they could make their way to sanctuary in Italy. It is estimated that thanks to her efforts, the lives of tens of thousands of Jews were saved. I've just been to the German cemetery in the Vatican. It's a little closed-off place that you can visit a few times a week until midday to see the tomb of Sister Pascalina. And it's a most beautiful place. There are palm trees, it's very green, it's very peaceful, and I lit a candle for her. She's an unsung heroine of the world, and she deserves her moment of glory. In 1945, at the end of the war, 90% of Italy's Jewish population had survived, thanks to the efforts of Sister Pascalina and ordinary Italian people. But sadly, the ghetto, those amazing people, the families, the businesses, the life that had been here on these very streets was never fully to return. Today, it is a fashionable and expensive part of Rome whose property commands high prices. Only 25% of the ghetto's population are Jewish, although kosher businesses, bakeries and restaurants thrive, reminding me not a little of downtown Jerusalem. And once again the synagogue is full. Though what happened to the menorah and the sacred archives remains a mystery.